Welcome back to the Old Photo Vault channel. The Halloween Photograph. Cedar Lane, Ohio. October 31st, 1998. It was meant to be a harmless Halloween photograph, taken in Emily Harper's childhood bedroom just before the guests arrived. The room was too warm, cluttered with stuffed animals and half-forgotten posters, smelling faintly of candy and dust. Emily stood still for the camera, wearing a cheap costume mask and her sister's blouse, trying not to laugh. The photographer told her not to move. She didn't. When the photo was printed days later, the mouth looked longer than any mask should allow. The dark inside it, uneven, almost soft. Emily never saw it. She died 2 nights after Halloween, quietly, in her sleep, with no clear cause. The photographer kept the picture, uneasy but unable to throw it away. Years later, after his death, the photograph was found again. The bedroom looked the same. The girl did not. The mask seemed thinner now, as if something beneath it had learned how to smile. The breath between trees. Blackwood Forest, England. November 2006. It was a casual photograph, taken at the edge of the woods, the kind made to remember a night rather than mark it. The ground was wet with moss, the air cold enough to turn every breath into smoke. Hannah and Claire crouched near the tree roots, sharing a lighter, laughing quietly so they wouldn't wake anyone back at the car. The flash startled them, flattening the dark into detail. Later, when they looked at the image, the breath behind them seemed too tall, too shaped to be fog. It stood where no one had been standing, pale and waiting, its outline blurred but patient. Claire joked about it once, then never again. She died the following spring, alone on a walking trail not far from this spot. Hannah kept the photo on her phone. Over time, the smoke behind them began to resemble a face, exhaling, as if it had finally caught up. The frozen horses. Near the Volga floodplain, Russia. Winter, 1933. The photograph was taken to show endurance, nothing more. A young couple stood wrapped in heavy coats, posing beside the horses that had failed to survive the night. The river had flooded, then frozen too quickly, trapping the animals where they stood. Their heads rose from the snow at odd angles, as if listening. The woman's gloves were stiff with cold. The man kept his hand on her shoulder so she wouldn't slip. When the image was developed, people noticed how alert the horses looked. Their eyes, though rimmed with ice, seemed wet. The couple later said the wind had sounded wrong that day, like breathing caught under the ice. They left the village before spring. Years afterward, when the river froze again, locals claim the shapes returned in the same field, more each year. Not bodies exactly, just heads emerging patiently, waiting for the thaw that never quite comes. The face in the beard. Rural Bavaria, Germany, 1891. The photograph was taken in winter, meant to record an old trapper known for his long beard and fox fur hat. He sat patiently before the camera, hands folded, breath slow, as if accustomed to being studied. The photographer remembered how still the room felt, how the man barely blinked. Nothing seemed unusual at the time, only the weight of age and silence. When the plate was developed, a second face appeared within the beard. Smaller, softer, unmistakably younger. Its eyes were open, its mouth slightly parted, as though interrupted mid-thought. The trapper denied knowing who it was. He died before spring, alone in his cabin, beard carefully combed. The photograph remained. Over the years, viewers noticed the smaller face growing clearer, while the man behind it seemed to fade. Some claim the beard was never hair at all, but a place where unfinished lives learned how to wait. The woman who wouldn't leave. St. Agnes Funeral Home, Missouri. 1947. The photograph was taken after the service, when the room had gone quiet and the lilies had begun to sag under their own sweetness. The woman in the casket was fully grown, dressed carefully, her face softened to resemble sleep. The undertaker adjusted the satin lining and stepped back, satisfied that everything looked proper. Nothing in the room suggested movement. When the image was developed, a second figure appeared beside the casket. An adult woman, thin and pale, her outline blurred as if the camera could not decide where she belonged. She stood upright, hands lowered, looking not at the body, but at the space beyond it. The resemblance was unmistakable, though the standing woman seemed older somehow, worn in places the body was not. The undertaker called it a trick of light. The family noticed that each time the photograph was copied, the standing figure grew clearer, while the woman in the casket appeared to rest more easily, as if someone had finally stayed behind to keep watch. The figure between them. Paris, France, 1896. The photograph was taken in a narrow studio that smelled of dust and chemicals, the kind of place where men spoke softly out of habit. 2 scholars posed as instructed, one seated, reading aloud from a small book, the other standing behind him, hands clenched, eyes fixed on the lens. They were documenting a seance experiment, nothing theatrical, nothing meant to impress. The woman was not present in the room. At least, no one remembered her arriving. Yet when the plate was developed, she stood clearly between the men, suspended, wrapped in a veil that blurred her edges, but not her expression. She looked adult, composed, almost weary, as though waiting for the reading to finish. The scholars argued it was a double exposure. Still, they never repeated the experiment. Years later, the book in the photograph was found closed for the first time. Its final page turned, as if someone unseen had reached the ending and decided to stay. The shape at the mirror's edge, Montmartre, Paris, 1924. The photograph was taken in a rented room just before dusk, when the light still lingered but no longer felt reliable. The woman sat at her vanity, adjusting the stars in her hair, surrounded by sketches and postcards pinned carelessly to the wall. She remembered the room as familiar, almost comforting. The mirror spotted with age, but dependable enough to show her face. Only later did anyone notice the shape along the mirror's edge. It was not centered, not dramatic, just a pale narrowing, like a shoulder leaning in where no body stood. The woman insisted nothing had been behind her, that the room had been empty and quiet. After the photograph was taken, she began covering the mirror at night, claiming it reflected her too slowly. When she left the apartment, the new tenant found the mirror uncovered. The shape was still there, closer now, waiting for someone else to sit down and look. The eyes that looked back. New Haven, Connecticut, 1912. The photograph was taken indoors on a quiet afternoon, when the house was still and the light from the window softened every edge. The woman had been asked to sit near the doorway, her hair loose, her face relaxed. She remembered feeling tired but calm, listening to the floorboards settle behind the walls. Nothing about the moment felt unusual. When the image was developed, her eyes appeared too open, fixed on something above and slightly behind the camera. The photographer assumed it was nervousness, but those who knew her said she never looked that way, not even in fear. Weeks later, she claimed she no longer recognized her reflection, that it watched her instead of following her movements. She died quietly that winter. The photograph survived. Over time, the eyes in the image seemed to adjust, focusing more clearly, as if whatever she saw that day had finally finished stepping into view. The faces beneath the floor. Hartford, Connecticut, 1938. The photograph was taken during a routine inspection, meant to document water damage in the corner of a basement room. The concrete floor was dark with age, uneven where repairs had been made years apart. The homeowner remembered the space as ordinary and cold, smelling faintly of iron and soap. He stood still while the picture was taken, impatient to have the work finished. When the image was examined later, shapes appeared beneath the surface of the floor. Faces pressed upward, blurred but distinct enough to suggest eyes, mouths, the soft curve of cheeks. They did not look pained. They looked attentive. The contractor said it was mineral staining, a common trick of moisture and light. Still, the homeowner began to avoid the basement, unsettled by the feeling of being overheard. After he died, the house sat empty for years. When the floor cracked from frost, neighbors claimed the shapes beneath it seemed closer to the surface, as if time itself had worn thin where they were waiting to be seen. The third woman at the counter, Cedar Falls, Iowa. Thanksgiving Eve, 1976. The photograph was taken in the small kitchen just before dinner, when the house smelled of onions and warm bread. Margaret Lewis stood at the counter mixing batter, while her younger sister Elaine leaned in behind her, smiling at something just said. They remembered laughing, arguing gently about the recipe, nothing more. The window reflected the dusk. The bowls were mismatched, familiar, ordinary. When the film was developed, a third woman appeared between them in the glass. Older than Elaine, thinner than Margaret, her face faint but attentive. Margaret recognized her immediately. It was Ruth Caldwell, the woman who had owned the house before them, who died there in 1958 after collapsing alone in the kitchen. Dinner unfinished. Ruth had been known for hosting large holiday meals she never missed. After that year, Margaret said she always felt watched while cooking. She never set the table for two again. Always three, just in case Ruth was still waiting to be served. The Man Who Stayed Too Long. Boone County, Kentucky, 1872. The photograph was meant to record a respectable family at rest. Thomas Whitaker seated stiffly, his wife Eleanor standing behind him, their young son placed carefully between his knees. The studio smelled of wool and damp earth, the curtain heavy and unmoving. Thomas had been ill that winter, but insisted on sitting upright, his hands steady on the child's shoulders. The photographer told him not to blink. He didn't. When the plate was developed, Thomas's face appeared wrong. His eyes slightly misaligned, his mouth drawn into a shape no one remembered him making. Eleanor said it looked like someone else wearing him poorly. Thomas died 3 days later of fever, buried before the ground, fully thawed. Years afterward, relatives noticed that copies of the photograph seemed to change. The child grew clearer with time. Eleanor softened. But Thomas's face darkened, sharpening into something alert and strained, as if the man had stayed inside the image longer than his body ever managed to stay alive. The Student's Dream. Jefferson Medical College, Philadelphia, 1901. The photograph was staged as a joke after hours, meant to amuse tired medical students who had grown careless around the dead. Harold Whitman volunteered to lie on the table, coat buttoned, hands folded neatly, while the cadavers were arranged upright behind him like an audience. The chalked words on the table were added last, a bit of dry humor before the lamps were turned off. When the plate was developed, one figure stood out. Third from the left, a cadaver's face appeared fuller than the others, its eyes darker, almost focused. Harold noticed it immediately. He said the face belonged to Elias Monroe, a former student who had died in that same room 5 years earlier after collapsing during dissection. His body quietly added to the collection. Harold began sleeping poorly, dreaming of standing still while others studied him. He died before graduation, found on the same table. Later prints show the face more clearly now, no longer watching the student, but replacing him. The Blurred Guest at the Table, Leipzig, Germany, winter 1932. The photograph was taken after supper. when the plates were still warm and the men had loosened their ties. Ernst Keller sat in the center, raising a glass while his friends leaned in, laughing, their hands heavy on one another's shoulders. It was meant to capture a good night, nothing more. The room hazy with smoke and talk. When the photo was developed, one face refused to settle. Behind Ernst, a man appeared where no one remembered standing, his features smeared, his eyes dim, as if the camera could not hold him. Ernst recognized him at once. It was Wilhelm Braun, a former classmate who had died the year before, collapsing at this same table during a heated argument, his drink untouched. After that night, Ernst claimed chairs shifted on their own during dinners. He stopped hosting gatherings. The photograph remained. Over time, the blurred face grew clearer, while Ernst's began quietly to fade. The space between the kiss. Dayton, Ohio. Christmas Eve, 1979. The photograph was taken in the living room just before midnight, when the tree lights were still warm and the house smelled faintly of pine and coffee. Michael Turner leaned forward to kiss Susan Hale, both of them laughing at how carefully they had posed, hands hidden behind their backs like children. The moment felt rehearsed but sincere, the kind meant to be kept in an album. When the photo was developed, Susan noticed a dark shape between them, faint but human, standing where the tree should have been empty. Michael recognized it first. It resembled his older brother Daniel, who had died in that same house 6 years earlier, slipping on the stairs while carrying the Christmas decorations down from the attic. Daniel had never married. Michael said nothing, but every December after that, the lights flickered when the room was empty. The photograph never changed, except that the space between the kiss always seemed slightly more crowded than it should be. The Furnace Watcher, Bergen-Belsen, Germany. Winter, 1945. The photograph was taken as a record, nothing more, a man in uniform pausing beside the ovens at the end of a long shift. The brick walls were warm, the air metallic and dry, and he held a cloth in his hands the way he always did, careful not to touch the doors longer than necessary. He later said the room was quiet then, unusually so, as if the machinery itself had learned restraint. When the image was developed, a shape appeared inside the left furnace, pale, face-shaped, turned slightly outward, as though listening. The man insisted the chamber had been empty, cleaned, sealed. He asked for the negative to be destroyed, but it was filed instead. After the war, he refused work near heat and slept with windows open, even in snow. The photograph remains unchanged. Only the face inside the furnace seems clearer now, its eyes fixed not on the man, but on whoever stands long enough to look back. The Beds That Were Never Empty, Łódź, Poland, autumn 1946. The photograph was taken to show how little the room had changed since the tenants left. Two narrow beds faced each other, blankets folded stiff with age, the walls stained by damp and old breath. A small table sat between them, holding nothing of value. The landlord said no one had slept there since the war ended. When the image was developed, pale figures appeared between the beds, thin and upright, as if caught mid-step. They were adult shapes, indistinct but purposeful, their feet fading into the floor where shadows should have been. The landlord recognized the spacing at once. The room had once housed factory workers, couples forced to share space, sleep taken in shifts. Records showed 2 men died there in 1944, weeks apart, both from exhaustion. Neither moved out. The room remained unused after that. New tenants complained of footsteps at night, always pacing between the beds, careful not to disturb anyone still pretending to rest. The Third Woman in the Water. Mill Creek, Oregon. Late summer, 1983. It began as an ordinary afternoon, the kind spent waiting where the current slowed and the stones were smooth from years of passing hands. Laura Bennett knelt in the stream, rinsing her hair while her friend Miriam Cole leaned against the bank, laughing softly at the cold. Someone lifted a camera. No one posed. When the photograph was printed, a third woman stood in the water behind them, pale and upright, her dress clinging as if it had never dried. Laura recognized her face from a newspaper clipping kept in the town library. It was Anna Holloway, who drowned there in 1911 after slipping from the rocks while washing clothes, her body found days later downstream. After that summer, Laura refused to enter the creek again. Miriam said nothing, but each year the waterline crept higher. Locals claim the third woman still waits there, steady in the current, watching for someone willing to kneel where she once fell. The empty chair at breakfast. Peoria, Illinois, summer 1968. The photograph was taken just after sunrise, when the kitchen still smelled of coffee and toast. Jim Walker smiled at the camera, sleeves cut from his shirt, while his brothers Paul and Dennis sat quietly, cups warming their hands. The table felt crowded in a familiar way, chairs close, elbows nearly touching. Their mothers stood behind the camera and told them not to move. When the film came back, there was a fourth presence. At the far end of the table, the light bent oddly around an empty chair, forming the outline of a man leaning forward, chin in hand, listening. Jim knew the shape at once. It matched his older brother Robert, killed in a factory accident in 1965, the same week he was supposed to come home. After that summer, the family stopped setting that chair aside. Still, every morning, one cup was always empty and never cold. The officer who didn't drive away, Cedar Grove, Kansas. July 1974. It was an ordinary summer afternoon, the kind where the street stayed quiet and the trees cast polite shade. The patrol car was parked crooked at the curb, engine off, radio silent. A neighbor took the photograph without thinking much about it. Just another snapshot of the neighborhood, another proof that things were being watched. The officer inside the car was barely visible, his face lost to glare and dust on the windshield. Nothing seemed wrong until the photo was developed. Standing beside the light bar was a second figure, faint and upright, its outline blurring into the heat of the day. It wore the suggestion of a uniform, but no badge anyone recognized. Records later showed Officer Raymond Cole had died on duty 3 months before, struck by a passing truck on that same street. The patrol car had been reassigned, the badge number reused, but locals say that some afternoons, the car still stops there briefly, as if waiting for instructions that never come. The birthday he kept, Brno, Czechoslovakia, February 1919. It looks like a joke at first. A thin man in a paper party hat, standing in the stone archway, holding a cake with too many candles. The photographer remembered the cold that day, the way the old hospital courtyard smelled of lime wash and smoke. The man, Václav Hruška, had been an orderly during the war, known for small kindnesses and quiet humor. He asked for one photograph on his birthday. When the print came back, Václav's eyes were wrong, darkened as if the light refused them. The candles leaned inward, their flames uneven, though no wind crossed the arch. Records say Václav died the following winter of pneumonia, alone in a storage room behind the ward, his birthday unmarked. Years later, caretakers claimed that every February, a man appears beneath the arch, holding a cake that never melts, waiting for someone to remember why the candles were lit in the first place. And now, as these photographs fade back into silence, the question is no longer what the camera captured, but why it chose to remember. Were these only tricks of light and time, or traces of lives that refused to leave quietly? If you saw something in these images that others might miss, tell us in the comments. Which face, which shadow stayed with you the longest? And if you believe some moments never truly end, even after the shutter closes, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still looks twice at old photographs. Because sometimes the past isn't finished being seen.